Hey everyone, and welcome back. So today we're going to be reviewing a brand new challenger in the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con alternative market, the DOYOKY EPOCH game controller. Now, ever since the release of the Nintendo Switch, the Joy-Cons have been at the center of a lot of discussions, whether it's the drifting issues, whether it's the fact that it doesn't have an actual D-pad, or sometimes even just the ergonomics. A lot of people have been looking for ways to get a better overall experience than the ones that the original Joy-Cons provide. Now, there are multiple ways to get around this issue. For example, you could be using a grip. However, I personally was a very early adopter of the Hori Split Pad Pro because I really wanted something with a real D-pad. However, I've got to admit that looking back at those days, there were actually quite a few disadvantages with the Hori Split Pad Pro that products like the DOYOKY are actually fixing today. And actually for quite a while now, I'd been using the Nixie Joypad. And to be honest, nothing really came across my desk that was wowing me to actually try something different. That is, till the DOYOKY came across my desk, and when I looked over the features of it, it was worth trying. And in the end, what we're going to see in today's review is that there's actually probably a lot of people out there that would have a reason to maybe choose this one over something like the Nixie or the other options out there. Now, if at the end of today's review, you do decide that you want to pick one of these up, I do want to mention I will have an affiliate code down below in the description of the video and the top pinned comment, along with a special code that will give you an extra 10% off of your purchase, which is MSGT10. So if you do want to pick it up and you want to help out the channel at the same time, I would greatly appreciate you using that link. So now let's jump into today's review. Just remember, if you are liking the video, hit that like button and subscribe if you aren't already. So first of all, if we take just a really quick look at the box, I do want to mention it is a very simple presentation. You've got the name with a picture of the controller at the front. You've got a little bit of branding at the bottom. The other three sides are actually bland. And basically, once again, in the back, you've got a little bit more of a few of the features of the controller. Personally, it's maybe a little bit too simple. I know what's important is what's inside the box and not necessarily the box itself. But if we compare it to some other models out there, this is a very simple box. And nonetheless, this is the first impression you're going to get of the product. But on the upside, I've got to say that once you open it up, at least it comes in some nice packaging that keeps the controller safe. Some of these just come loose in the box sometimes. This one has some very nice packaging that secures it all in place, which is something that I like to see. And if you've got to put money somewhere, it is better to put it there than to put it on making a more beautiful box. So enough about the box, let's take a look at what comes inside. And basically, everything you see here is what was inside the box. First of all, you do get a welcome guide that basically are instructions for all the different functions of the controller. You obviously have the controllers themselves, but you also come with two alternate options for the top of the joysticks, which is something that I really like to see, and it's the first thing that wowed me about this controller. And lastly, you also get this because yes, these controllers are wireless, which allows you to basically sync them up and turn this into a complete regular sized wireless controller. And we'll see later, just like the Nixie controllers before them, this is one of my favorite options about these controllers. So first of all, just like normal Joy-Cons, they slide right in, they click, and the Switch will recognize them as Joy-Cons. Secondly, although there are USB-C chargers at the bottom, this is only when you're using it as a separate wireless controller because they do charge from the Switch railing just like normal Joy-Cons. Now, other than that, you are basically getting all the features that you do get in the original Joy-Cons except for the ability to read NFCs. And also, maybe what's good to mention is that this has normal rumble, not HD rumble, although you can personalize slightly the strength of the rumble feature. But as I mentioned, they are wireless, motion controls work very well, and on top of it, it comes with a few extra features that the Joy-Cons themselves do not have, such as programmable buttons, But not only at the back, what is very original about these is that there are also programmable buttons at the trigger spot. So you have 3 separate triggers, with these 2 triggers being programmable to anything you want, including a macro function. Which basically means that not only can you reprogram this button to any one of the regular face buttons, but you can also reprogram it for up to 16 inputs. And by the way, it is the same for the rear triggers. This is one of the best features so far of this controller, because the fact that it puts another button here at the trigger position can really be a game changer for some games. The programming is also extremely simple, simply pressing the M button, following by one of the programmable buttons, and then basically whichever inputs you want. When you finish your inputs, you basically hit the same programmable button that you pressed in the beginning, and it will remember the inputs. Removing the program is also extremely easy. All you need to do is hold down the button for seconds, and it'll basically reset each Joy-Con independently. After that, as I mentioned earlier, you can personalize the strength of the rumble feature on each Joy-Con independently. So if you like better, let's say your right hand to have a stronger rumble function while it being easier on the left one, that is also something that is doable. All you need to do is press the rumble feature here, and basically it will cycle through rumble off 50% and then basically back to 100%. The LED lighting feature can also be personalized separately. Basically pressing the lighting button, which is the one right here, will cycle through the different colors that are available. If you double press it, you will be changing the basic way that the lighting functions, whether it's breathing, flashing, or so forth. And finally, if you hold it down for a second and you let go, you'll be affecting how bright the light is. Now lastly, we also have a turbo functionality, which if you play a lot of retro games or games with a lot of repetitive inputs, let's say Animal Crossing, is a lifesaver. And once again, all you need to do is hold down the turbo button with whatever button you want to activate the turbo on. To deactivate it, you just repeat the process. Now lastly, on the special feature side, and I did talk about it slightly earlier, we have the swappable thumbsticks, which basically are very easy to swap out. You just pull up, you choose whichever alternative you would like, you press it down, and in a few seconds you can swap out. The different options are this texturized version, a smooth top version that also stands a little bit higher up, and lastly a nub. And I'm really glad they included alternatives in the packaging, because when we looked at the upgraded version to the Nixie controller, they did have this option as well, but they didn't have any alternatives included in the box, and at least for the moment there were none available on the website. So it's nice to see that this one actually comes with different alternatives. So now that we've gone over all the functionalities, let's switch to more of a review perspective, because I've been using these controllers now for over a month, and I've got to say, number one, yes, I am impressed. I do like them a lot, but they aren't perfect. So let's go look at what are the best points about these controllers, and also what are a few of the things that maybe I liked a little less. Now, first of all, let's start with some of the good things. Ergonomic wise, they are very comfortable controllers, especially if you have larger hands. This is going to be probably a very comfortable option for you. Also, the texturized grips here on the side really do feel good. And also, I'm impressed because normally I don't necessarily like this sort of slightly leathery feel that they have. But this one actually feels really good in your hands. It doesn't ever get sticky. Even when I'm sweating, they don't start sticking to your hand, which is why actually I thought I wouldn't like this texturized feel at the beginning, but in the end, I really ended up liking it. Number two, I really like the fact that all these special functions have a dedicated button. A lot of these controllers sort of double up on the functionality between the buttons, and it can sometimes be a little hard to remember how to program them, especially when you don't have the guide with you and you don't want to start looking up online the instructions. This one makes it really easy because each button has a dedicated function. Now, although I did just show this functionality, the swappable thumbsticks were also a very appreciated feature because I personally am very sensitive to the feeling of thumbsticks. So the fact that I can choose which one I like best was really something that I appreciated. And lastly, in the definitely very strongly positive features, it's the ergonomics when this is set up in wireless mode. Because if you're playing in tabletop, which is one of my preferred modes of playing, or again in docked mode, this controller almost feels like a standard Pro controller when you're holding it, which is such an upgrade compared to the dog-faced controller when you put the Joy-Cons in the Nintendo holder, which makes an extremely small controller that sometimes can just be very uncomfortable. One thing that I do want to mention, in this mode, the battery life is not the best. It lasts about 4 to 5 hours. In tabletop mode, that's not really an issue because your Switch will always run out of battery before your controller does. But if you're using this as your main controller in dock mode, you might have to charge it on a fairly regular basis. And now that really brings us to maybe some of the critiques that I have with this controller. Now, although the macro buttons, as I said, I really appreciated the placement of them, I've got to say, but this is something that is common to all controllers currently that do accept macro functionality. If you're using multi-button inputs, it really will be a mixed bag depending on the game you're playing if it's going to accept it. For example, fighting games, you can very rarely program super moves like a Street Fighter super move to it and that it functions successfully. But as I said earlier, that is pretty much common to all the controllers with macro functionality. It's just that this controller isn't fixing it. Secondly, the D-pad, although it is very serviceable, and I prefer it a ton to the standard Joy-Cons, it is not the best D-pad. I do find the Nixie controller does have a slightly superior D-pad, but it's not bad. It's just not the best one that I've seen on this type of controller. So if you do play a lot of 2D games and you really need an extremely efficient D-pad, this one is serviceable, but not the best. And my last major gripe with this controller was the size of the plus-minus capture and home button, as well as their placement. I find these buttons on this controller, because of their shape and placement, feel way too small. And it did happen regularly where I was missing the button, hitting the Y button instead, or really having trouble differentiating if I was hitting the home button or the plus button. It wasn't too much of an issue because these buttons rarely depend on fast reflexes, but for the capture button, being so close to the thumbstick, I really did have to take my finger completely off the thumbstick and find it when I needed to take a capture during gameplay. So although I did appreciate the buttons here for the dedicated buttons at the bottom, and the fact that they're so small and hard to hit was advantageous because you don't want to hit them by mistake, I did find it unfortunate that they didn't use a different shape of button at the top, or maybe just space it out a little bit more. But overall, nonetheless, I've got to say that my experience with this controller was very positive. Now, where does this leave us conclusion-wise, and whether you should be picking up this controller or not? Well, to make things simple, this is a very serious alternative if you're looking for something different than your standard Joy-Con. And in my opinion now, the two best options out there are this controller here or the Nixie that I reviewed last year and I did an update video on when they switched the joysticks to Hall Effect joysticks, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, these are Hall Effect joysticks as well. You should not have any drifting issues. And basically, I don't really think there's a wrong answer here. It's simply, what do you prefer? Do you prefer having both programmable buttons at the back here, like the Nixie, or do you prefer the really original placing of the buttons on this controller with one at the rear and one at the top trigger position? And do you prefer a controller that has maybe, in my opinion, a slightly better feel due to its texturizing here than the Nixie controller? Or do you prefer the fact that the Nixie has a maybe slightly better overall D-pad? As you can see, there's no wrong or right answer here. It really depends on what you're looking for. And retail pricing, there isn't even much of a difference, with both of those controllers going for around $65. So they are more on the premium price side, but they're still pretty much the same price as standard Joy-Cons. So hopefully today's review did help you if you were looking at which controllers to pick up. I would like to hear from all of you. If you do pick these up, what did you think of the controllers? Let me know in the comments down below. If you have any questions, same thing, leave it down below. Don't forget, on the way out, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and click on that notification bell. And as usual, I hope I'll see you in my next video.